Hopefully it should be better in this speech, but if not.
Thank you. Now we'll open up the third speaker of the Affirmative.
All right, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Look, I think we're in a debate about how watching things like The Lion King affect your moral compass. And the negative side spends so much time talking about how this affects you as an adult when you probably haven't watched The Lion King for the past 20 years. I think there's a clear mismatch in weighing and priorities here. Okay, 3 things to do in my speech. Firstly, on a brief note on framing. Secondly, on long-term benefits. And then thirdly, and most importantly, on short-term benefits. Okay. So the main contention around effectiveness of internalization in the framing here is a push from Neg that gets largely rebutted, but I'd just like to whip this again, where they talk about the main reason why you might not internalize narratives around good and evil, etc., from these movies being the repetitiveness. But we hear great responses from Clara as to why this repetitiveness is good, right? Essentially, if you see these things over and over again, you're probably going to remember them better. I'd also like to add that kids have notoriously very, very terrible memories. And if they were to only watch a certain type of movie or a certain movie once, they probably aren't going to remember how it went in 2 weeks' time. Whereas when kids do what kids normally do, like me when I was 3 and watched The Lion King like 10 times every week, they're going to internalize those things a lot better, right? But largely, I think there's an overestimation from Neg as to how this impacts you, right? Because I feel like going into your later life, if you were going to be something extreme like racist or homophobic or particularly politically polarized, these things are likely to still take place anyway, right? I don't think like watching Finding Nemo over and over and over again and having this internalized narrative about good and evil is going to make you any more racist than you would be if you grew up in the Bible Belt in America and your parents are telling you to be racist your whole life, right? I'll take a point briefly before I move on.
Why do you bully kids when you don't think that kid is an evil person?
Well, I think kids generally bully kids for a number of reasons, right? I don't think any of them are excusable, but largely I think, you know, I'll get to that anyway, because in the later points about short-term benefits, because bullying is a huge harm for us there. Okay, so long-term benefits. We tell you in our world that people become more perceptive of unfair persecution, right? This is a point I think is important to whip because it's pretty huge, right? You see things like the Beast in Beauty and the Beast being unfairly persecuted because of the way that he looks, the way that he is. You see like, I don't know, the rats in Ratatouille being persecuted despite the fact that they're actually really good chefs, right? We tell you that most of your thinking when you're an adult comes from adult media. This is because a majority of people don't stick to watching Cars and Toy Story as they age. They watch more and more increasingly, you know, subjective and crazy things, right? And children struggle to hold this kind of double think, if you will, until they're old, right? They struggle to hold competing moral sort of thinking in their head, right? Because they're kids. Like, their brains are simply not developed enough to do these things effectively. Now, in their world, they tell you about greater bipartisan cooperation is a huge benefit in their world. They tell you about children benefiting, developing more moral subjectivity. And a small point in the last 30 seconds of second neg about like villains being racially stereotyped. Okay, 3 main responses here. Firstly, I think more bipartisan support is a lofty benefit. It requires a high analytical burden here. It requires, firstly, the kids to really deeply internalize the subjectivity. It requires them to remember it and carry it out until they are old enough to be, you know, engaging in political systems. And also, you know, requires them to apply these things to politics over things like their culture, what their parents might have taught them, right? Secondly, I think even if you internalize these things to a great degree, right, I think your things like your religion will still prevail, right? And these would be the majority of harms, i.e. like if you're politically polarized and you don't want to vote for Biden because of some X sort of transphobic belief that you have, right? Whatever sort of belief that you're internalizing while you're young from these media narratives is likely not as effective as something, as I've already said, something that is prevalent in your life on either side, right? And thirdly, even though the stereotypes thing is brought up in the last 30 seconds of second neg, so they obviously don't think it's that important. I am going to bring it up. But firstly, again, this is impacted by the framing, all right, of your racism being largely unaffected. But secondly, I feel like most films are generally moving away from this, right? Obviously, when you watch films from the 1940s, there are going to be slightly anti-Semitic characteristics of the villains, because most people in the 1940s were anti-Semitic. But when you're watching movies like Car, and the main villain is just like a car, I don't see how that is actually making you any more racist than you were before, right? So in the long term, right, why is awareness of persecution more tangible than bipartisan outreach? Because I feel like largely, again, these kids are more likely to understand this. You're going to see the Beast being, you know, persecuted by these guys with pitchforks and think, wow, that is really unfair, that is really wrong. I can relate to that when, I don't know, my mum takes my toys off me because I feel like I shouldn't have gone to bed so early, right? They can relate to this. But when you're saying complex, in a Studio Ghibli film where there's complex actors going on and complex, political machinations and things, it is a lot less likely, firstly, for you to get that, but secondly, even if you do get that, to carry that on to your later life. Whereas the very basic idea that you shouldn't, persecute people unfairly is a lot better there. But largely, I think this point about long term, right? Even if you don't buy our stuff on this, I feel like there's a high burden from analysis for neg to prove this, right? I feel like the short term is more pertinent because naturally the effects that watching Cars has on your moral compass degrades as you get older because you watch those types of films less and it's been longer since you have. So let's talk about short term benefits then. In our world, we mainly tell you about minorities getting better outcomes, mainly emotionally, but not just minorities, simply victims of things like bullying, right? And this sort of thing. And then in their world, they tell you about a better relation to bullies, more nuanced child relationships, and conflict being less adversarial, and that being a benefit. There are two overarching responses here, right? Firstly, even if you become incentivized to make amends with your bully, I don't think that is an immediate and obvious benefit, right? There are still some major harms. Firstly, it's incredibly likely that your bully just does not compromise you. Even if you do what Ned claims you should do and go over and say, hey, I know you hate me because I'm an immigrant, but I'm actually really cool. He's probably like, okay, I'm gonna steal your lunch money anyway. And then you don't get any real benefit there, right? Whereas on our side, you're not even attempting to make that move. Yeah, so there's less chance that you become happy-dappy with them and you run off into the sunset forever. But you do get a serious tangible benefit in the fact that you don't feel like you are shamed, right? Secondly, I feel like even if you do manage to reach some sort of uneasy coalition with this bully of yours, there's going to be mistrust, and then there's largely going to be further harm, right? Secondly, we don't think you are nicer to your bully. I feel like this is a misrepresentation that comes from the negative side here, right? We feel like you feel better when you are bullied. Why? Because you get less victim shaming. We get all this great analysis from Sam and then from Clara about how if you're getting bullied for your food smelling bad, and then you go and report it to a trusted adult or something, and then they tell you, oh, you should empathize with Jimmy's beliefs because his father just really, really hates, people of color, right? That is not going to make you feel better. In fact, that makes you feel significantly worse. Why? Because it feels like not only are you sad, but you feel like you shouldn't be sad. You feel like your sadness is morally wrong, right? And that is a huge, significant harm. It is much more tangible of a harm than potentially, the benefit of being slightly more politically, capable in your adult life. I'll take another point briefly before I finish up. Oh, sorry, never mind. Okay, that's my fault. Apologize, guys. So at the end of this, why is bullying so important to kids? Because it's our main benefit here. We spend so much time on it. Why is this so important to kids in the short term, right? Because we've already proved that kids in the short term are the main benefactors here. A lot of people and a lot of time, right? A lot of people, when they're kids, are bullied. Maybe they're, on the highest order of harms, maybe there's a certain person who bullies them regularly. But on the lowest order of harms, probably they're mean to each other a lot of the time because kids are generally not very considerate of each other's feelings compared to adults, right? And so then, therefore, this is a really big likely harm, right? There are not a lot of other ways in most children's lives in which they can feel this kind of emotional harm to themselves and potentially physical harm, depending on how bad it is, right? Therefore, even if we get a slight increase to this, because this is such an impactful point in children's young lives before they reach adulthood, this is so, so crucial because at the end of the day, you're not going to be a swing voter just because you watched a Studio Ghibli film instead of Cars 2. And that's why I'm very proud to affirm. Thank you.
I'd like the speaker for that speech, and then I will come up the third speaker for the Ghibli team.
let's be real here, children are very easily influenced by the media that they consume. They are very susceptible to taking in and internalizing the ideas that movies tell them. On their side, they teach children that everything is a matter of right and wrong. On our side, we actually teach people that not everything is about you being right and the other person being wrong. Sometimes there is moral grayness, moral relativity, not everything is objective. Two things I'm gonna do in this speech. First, I'm gonna explain to you why like the change in terms of like the vulnerable children is very marginal at best, and second, why like children just generally internalize better norms and internalize norms better, like internalize these ideas better on our side. Let's start with like the vulnerable children that they've prioritized so much down the line. First thing they told us, in terms of hope, note that Bruce already explained to you why hope is like isn't mutually exclusive. We have that benefit on our side. They never gave sufficient responses to prove why that isn't true. That's one reason why the change is so marginal. Second, on children not being able to stand up for themselves. I'm gonna use their own analysis to disprove this right now. Okay, they told us that they told us that like people learn moral grayness from the world. I don't see why this is mutually exclusive from being able to learn what's right and wrong from the world as well. That is, that if like punching someone in the face is wrong, then you're likely to pick that up from society and not just be stuck in an echo chamber of compromise. If they gave us analysis, I think we can use this analysis to disprove this as well. Note that they also don't explain sufficiently why this actually changes anything. They gave us loads of impacts as to why that's the case, but they never explained why, first of all, being like angry is going to do anything about like the bullying that you received. They only explained why the anger may be potentially justified. Note that at the end of this, it means that bullying still exists, they're still gonna get punched in the face, and we think that's really bad. Next, just on like complacency and why people are like apparently willing to, I don't know, stay in bad situations. Note that first of all, wider society teaches you that really bad things are really bad. You don't punch someone in the face. You don't, I don't know, kick someone. That's just like a societal norm that has been really ingrained and something that is taught to you from a very young age. But also, like, Ghibli tropes don't necessarily show you why these things are good. Two incentives to this. Firstly, there's accountability by wider society. They're gonna get a lot of backlash if they say, oh, you punch someone in the face, that may be morally gray, and that may be a potentially good thing. But also, just social norms dictate that you shouldn't be doing things that actively go against, I don't know, things that have been ingrained in society for a long time. That is, that you wouldn't be, just social norms dictate that you wouldn't be teaching children why violence is a good thing. So, at the end of this, what have I proven to you? I've proven to you why they don't actually benefit the vulnerable kids that they prioritize so much down the line. The impact of this is that they stay bullied, they stay upset, and they literally don't get any change except for the fact they are more angry and more antagonistic of the people around them. What this means at the end of this debate is they prioritize the stakeholders so much down the bench. They explain to you why this is important. Note that given the fact that we just proven any change for the stakeholder on their side, they can't even win this debate. Okay, I'll take a point of information now.
Yeah, isn't it uniquely hopeful for marginalized children to show that people overcome their adversity, not just make peace with it?
Okay, I think that like making peace with adversity is better for children because they are less incentivized to continuously antagonize the people around them. That is, that they're able to internalize the negative narratives that bullies show to them less. They think less about why this, like, they think less about, they hate me because I'm an immigrant, that's why I'm really bad. Instead they think, okay, they hate me, it's okay, we'll move on with our lives because I'm never going to be able to change that person. Next, on my second point on why they internalize narratives. The first thing that they told us at third AF was that there is going to be like a really high burden to explain any of this. Two reasons why I don't think this is true. First, like media is highly influential in children's lives because they are so easily susceptible. I explained this to you in my introduction. But second, you see so many movies when you're a child because that's just a really like common form of entertainment. That means that it's really cumulative. When you watch loads of movies, the ideologies in those movies are likely to stay with you longer because you've seen it so much. So on engagement, like I think that on their side, like we explained to you in a POI why they generally just get worse engagement in terms of watching movies. Note that a lot of these Disney storylines tend to be very two-dimensional. Happy, evil person does evil thing, run away, come back, defeat evil. That's a storyline that generally gets quite repetitive after a certain amount of time. When you constantly see those storylines, you're less likely to actively engage with it because you already know what's happening next. Children like wonder. When that wonder is taken away, they don't want to listen. Next, just on how like parents teach children's complex ideas better. Look, I'm gonna use their own analysis to disprove this again. They really love shooting themselves in the foot. The first thing is, like they said that children don't listen to their parents, so I don't understand why they're going to listen to their parents in the realm of complex ideas. Again, they're more likely to listen to movies. I think I think their analysis already disproves that. But second, like parents are less likely to know these ideas really well because they've just grown up in a society where also like Disney optimism has been really dominant. It means that they understand these nuanced ideas less. They're less able to properly convey these ideas to their children. Next on how this moral relativity stuff confuses children. First, let's acknowledge why children are confused. That is because like Disney optimism has been so dominant in Western media. That is that most of the media that children in the West consume is about right and wrong. That means that like there's even more entrenched values of moral objectivity that are actively challenged if you hear anything about moral subjectivity. On the comparative, what we see is that children are exposed early, they're exposed often to like a lot of these ideas of moral relativity and subjectivity. That means they have a higher capacity to understand. But even if we accept their analysis that it may be harder for children to understand, we think on the comparative it is still better. That's because it sets a foundation for them to learn it. That is, that they know at least that it exists, and they know that not everything is black and white. Whether or not they understand the nuances of it, I don't think is important because at least they're more open-minded to understanding what this actually means. Next, I'm just gonna whip Jamie's split. Like I'm just gonna explain stuff about Jamie's split. Jamie explained to you why like movie companies and like film companies have a unique capacity to like push narratives, especially on their side. That is that you can portray certain demographics as good and certain demographics as evil. We can see this in Disney when a lot of the main characters are typically quite fair-skinned, and when a lot of the evil characters wear darker colors and like are coming from more marginalized demographics. They have the capacity to push this socio-political narrative that's unique on their side. This is really important because children literally internalize those narratives, and I think also this explains a lot of the reasons for why like a lot of marginalization and bullying occurs on their side. Okay, next on how like it teaches. Finally, just on how it teaches specific like morals and why that's really good. Okay, a couple responses to this. First of all, you can learn morals elsewhere. It's not just about parents that they've tried to mitigate down the line. It's also about the teachers telling you that it is not okay to kill someone. It is not okay to punch someone in the face, and also just wider societal norms also tell you what's right and wrong in terms of like what's socially and not socially acceptable. It's not just parents. But also second of all, a lot of the lessons that like movies teach you are a little bit whack, right? It's like saying that you shouldn't give your stepdaughter a poison apple. I don't think that that's a story. I don't think that those like other morals are particularly important in the context of this debate. Why are morals taught worse on their side then? Note that morals are worse because literally these movies set a precedent that morality is black and white. That means that there is no influential countervailing norm that teaches a potential compromise, because in our world, the societal norm is black and white morality, but we do have this countervailing norm from the media that children consume. Case-by-case examples are acknowledged less on their side. What have I proven to you at the end of this? I've proven to you why children internalize better morals and internalize morals better. The impact of this is that there's less arguing, less polarization, better communication, and note that childhood habits lead into adulthood. Note that we win this because this is far more impactful than their at best marginal change on vulnerable children. You should care about this so much more. Stand for the children, stand with Meg.
I thank the speakers for their speech. As is customary, will now reverse the speaking order, and I invite Brigade for their reply.
I think that the biggest difference between our world and the world of the affirmative side is that we have a wide variety of ways in which children are able to be taught certain morals. That is, we're able to teach morals about subjectivity, but we are also able to teach children morals about what is innately right and innately wrong. That's something that they have never been able to contend with on the negating side. I think for those reasons we have won this debate. I'm going to talk about two things. First, about the benefits of understanding moral subjectivity, and then second, on the vulnerable kids. Okay, on understanding moral subjectivity, two things. First, about how children interact with the media. Honestly, we think that given that children are able to learn ideas about subjectivity, we think that it's likely that they're able to learn those ideas. Honestly, the fact that these ideas are generally portrayed in similar ways on both sides, like in both types of movies, mean that they're probably able to like internalize these ideas regardless. We don't think it's very different from our side and theirs. I think it's quite clear we've proved down the bench that they will be able to understand these ideas. But then what are the impacts of entrenching black and white thinking? Noting that children internalize that their perspectives are always correct. These are things that they carry on into adulthood, the point at which we're able to explain to you that often children's ideas are established in childhood and they bring them onto adulthood. That's not something that they can actively change as they grow up. It means that the ideas that we entrench in when they're a child is something that actively they're brought up with. Noting that this just leads to the impacts of like not being able to engage properly with other people who disagree with you, actively antagonizing them in your daily life, or like having more polarization overall in society. The weighing we told you is that this impacts literally every single person on every single day of their life, the point at which their interactions are significantly worse. Noting that the affirmative were only willing to engage with the extreme end of this case, the point about polarization. We told you that there are significantly more harms other than political polarization, the point at which individuals' daily lives are just significantly less happy. I think because of those reasons, we have won this point. Okay, on vulnerable kids then, I think we've sufficiently proved the point before. This is what their biggest push was. They told us two things. First, that stories are able to give children hope and feelings that they will prevail in the long term. Secondly, that it's really bad when people are told that their struggles are invalid or don't matter. What did we tell you then? Firstly, is that feelings of hopes can be given to children in other ways. That is the same way that we can teach morals to kids about why punching people are bad. I think parents are able to teach their children about why their struggles are valid and why they deserve to be heard. Note then that feelings of hopes can also be shown in movies on our side. That is to say, there is a different kind of success, that is true, but noting that that kind of success still manifests itself as a form of success, the point at which people are able to come to terms with people who oppress them, the point at which they still are able to get net benefits on their side of the house, noting that we don't have to stand by them just being like sacrificing them, like their whole morals and their whole identities in these stories. Honestly, the point at which we're able to show them have compromise, the point at which we're able to show that they gain net benefits from compromise, that's the point at which this point stands. Noting that also it's unrealistic to assume that people are going to tell other children that their struggles are invalid. I think it's unreasonable to assume that teachers are going to tell children who have been bullied that their struggles are invalid. I think that teachers are likely to engage properly on that front. I think it's quite clear that even though we're able to show children that, compromise is a good thing, the point at which they are only able to engage with this idea that children are going to feel as though their struggles aren't valid, I don't think that point stands. How should you judge this debate then? First is about which material is logically prior. Note then that when children are more becoming of other people, of other kinds of ideas, I think that the harms that negating or the affirmative try to push are less likely to happen. What we told you in Jamie is that when we explain that when these kids become more becoming to other issues, they're less likely to be racist in the first place. They're less likely to bully other kids, the point at which they no longer see them as antagonistic. I think that's the point at which we have logically prior material. It's far more important. But second, about which impacts are just more likely. Note that we gave you a lot of analysis as to how media impacts people when they're young and how it translates to adulthood, how beliefs are carried on from childhood and they're entrenched in your very being. I think the point at which we told you that people's daily lives are influenced in small ways that impacts them in the ways that they're unable to just have good lives and engage with people, I think it's far more realistic than telling children that their values aren't important. I think for those reasons we have won this debate. Very proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and I welcome up the affirmative leaders to close this debate.
At the end of this debate, I'm a little bit confused about how influential Nick thinks movies are. Because on the one hand, they tell you that this moral objectivism narrative in movies is going to be so influential that it stops people from being racist, from being bigoted, or at least mitigates that to like a debate-winning extent. But on the other hand, they want you to tell you that there is going to be no difference between people's ability to conceive of like moral objectivity and that some things are fundamentally right and some things are fundamentally wrong. 3 things to do in my speech. Firstly, on effectiveness. Secondly, on the other pressures that act in kind of your adult life and how might you change. And lastly, on children and the immediate. Okay, firstly, on effectiveness. We tell you a couple of things about Disney movies. Firstly, that repetition that Nig wants to tell you is so bad is really good because it's quite difficult to teach children a narrative, especially if there are conflicting ones in society. The more you tell it to them, the more they'll believe it. But secondly, that the simplicity and that dichotomy is really easy for young children to pick up. But also that there's just an identification with the super cool character who doesn't exist when you have to portray people kind of on equal footing. Because there's no cognitive dissonance in a world where your movies are right and wrong and your parents tell you right and wrong because of religion or whatever else, those narratives are more influential because you don't have to try and pick and choose between what your parents tell you and what movies tell you. But also, we have the ability to just unambiguously condemn bad things, right? It's like bad things in movies are bad. We tell you that they're bad. Bad things in real life are also just unambiguously bad. I think that was really important, right? And by their own analysis, where they tell you there's lots of pressure to kind of think of a good and evil characterization of the world, I think it's just kind of unlikely that the world changes so much, that this compromised narrative is so important that people become unpolarized or at least have better interactions in the day-to-day like they tell you. The last thing I want to note here is that objectivism that we teach our children is their moral foundation. They can add that nuance later by interacting with other media, by developing life experiences, but it's the most salient if you just tell them some things are right and some things are wrong from the get-go. What does that mean then for people's interactions as adults? I think it means a couple of things. Firstly, it's probably just relatively difficult for us to buy at the end of the debate that people's practical experiences and interacting with each other are significantly changed, especially when it is true that there is still going to be a strong narrative about black and white morality, because that is actually shooting themselves in the foot from Nig, right? But I think the second thing to note on their kind of racism material, on demographics, these things are the products of their time, and as culture becomes more progressive, we use these movies to unambiguously condemn things that are bad. That is how you get a meaningful change, because it is such a much stronger message. I think, though, what happens in the adult world is probably relatively confusing, and it also relies on how people experience the world as children. So what happens to children? I think two things. Firstly, for children more generally, they're more likely to go out of their way to do good under our side, right? Because you are the superhero. You're not just being nice because your mum told you to do. You are Superman, you are Elsa. That's really important, right? I think that outweighs a very marginal difference on how likely you are to compromise with your friends about having an orange or whatever else. But I think secondly then, on are these children still bullied? I think because all the pressures of good and evil and religion and racism and everything else still exist, these children are still bullied. But that uniquely they have a hopeful ability to overcome adversity. I think it's much better than making peace with it, because who wants to make peace with the person that is bullying you? I think that's pretty unintuitive, right? But the most important thing here was that you are able to identify your persecution with persecution you see on screen. That's really important. That's a benefit they never adequately contend with. Lastly, on anger, it is justified, but the benefit here is in telling children that their anger is justified. It's not accruing a harm from telling them that they shouldn't feel that way, that they should just be empathetic to their bully, that they should shake hands, make friends, make nice. That was the really real emotional harm, and that's when a compromise narrative does kick in, because people are telling you that this thing is true. You relate it to this thing that you're seeing on movies. For once, it is actually important, and these children who are uniquely marginalized actually accrue harm. I think at the end of the debate, that was the worst thing that could happen.
Thank the speaker for their speech and everyone for a great debate. You can cross the floor and shake hands if you want.
Good debate.
Thanks.
Thank you for your debate.
Thanks for the debate.